You're listening to Elite Athletic Performance.
Yeah. Perfect. So back from our hiatus, we should probably make some form of like social media, maybe like a Twitter, in the near future in terms of when we're gonna basically take breaks from the podcast. But so far, we've basically addressed the last 4 episodes of basically overtraining, central nervous fatigue, and certain lifestyle patterns that basically influence overtraining. But now we're going to start transitioning into the actual, the meat of things in the sense of like certain injuries that people already have, how they're actually, how they actually occur, what you can do to basically mitigate them, because people don't actually have the resources to go see a physiotherapist or a certain type of massage therapist to address them right away because they don't actually have the funds, and ultimately what they can do to prevent any of these type of injuries from even occurring. So in terms of talking about like what are the 3, or maybe 4 even main hot areas in terms of injuries that people possess that a lot of people would probably see in the gym, is that a lot of people have back pain, they have shoulder pain, chest pain, and they also have something related to their knees. So we'll just start off with just addressing maybe each individual injury and why are they occurring, or what are possible lifestyle factors that are causing these injuries to even occur. Because let's be honest, if you're training correctly, that should stop you from getting injured in the first place, if your training is sound, at least.
So I think what we can say to kind of surmise a lot of these injuries is they all somewhat have a common base. And the common base is we are flexion addicts. And what I mean by flexion addicts is our society is basically always in forward flexion. What are you like? Everything that you do is in front of you. So you have to bend down and pick up something. You're typing something on a computer. It's in front of you, right? So the problem with that is that the more and more that you do that, especially in a seated position, you create a flexion dominance. And that flexion dominance now sets up a chain of mechanical events, which then can possibly, based on previous injury history, either contribute to or exacerbate an injury, right? So a case in point, person who is getting some shoulder problems, it could be you could trace it back to, well, does this person have a seated job or a standing job? And if they're in a seated job, do they spend a lot of time sitting in front of a computer? And the computer monitor, the ergonomics of that computer monitor and keyboard are not placed in a certain way. So by and large, practice makes not perfect, but permanent. So you keep practicing your body to tell your body to stay in a particular position. Yeah. It remembers that position, and then it perceives that as a normal.
Yeah. So basically, your body is actually smarter than you think, because if your body can recognize certain lifestyle patterns very quickly and then basically adjust your own system to basically be able to find that equilibrium of that lifestyle pattern. So for example, like you mentioned, if you're sitting at a front job, your body will basically get used to basically have your shoulders rolled forward for the majority of the day.
Right. And then all of a sudden now you go from your desk, now you're going to go to a bench, and what do most people do when they lie down? They sleep.
Yeah.
So the actual bench press is not a normal position for the body in terms of working out. Being on your back, what you're doing when you're being on your back is telling your body, yeah, I'm ready, getting ready to sleep. And so now, if you have certain muscles that are dormant because of your job and become dormant, when you lie on your back, you're going to become even more dormant. So what happens is that you end up using the wrong muscles to do the same lift. Which then over
creates
time
an imbalance, right?
Creates an imbalance. Yeah. So over time, you hit a critical load, at which point your body structurally cannot maintain the integrity of the load, and obviously now that results in some sort of impairment or.
So could we give like an example? Like, let's say Joe, he has a 9 to 5 like everybody else, or the majority of people. he's at a desk and now he wants to go start doing bench press. He starts bench pressing, on a consistent basis. And now he gets to a point where basically he wants to, start increasing the weight. And now he has injured himself. He basically, maybe he pinches a shoulder, and, he notices as soon as he finishes the lift, there's something wrong with his shoulder.
Right. One of the problems, the biggest problems, and it's sort of like a hidden problem that most people don't see, is the long head of the bicep. The long head of the bicep flows into what we call the boot of the shoulder, and the actual boot's called superior lateral anterior posterior labrum. So that portion of the shoulder is very susceptible. A lot of times it's sort of misdiagnosed. It's called a slap tear, and I think I might have said it wrong. I think it's superior labral anterior posterior. So the boot of the shoulder, and there's like 7 different types of labral injuries, as far as I know. I'm not familiar with all of them, but basically you have the 3 main ones, which is basically it can be pulled vertically, it could be pulled anteriorly, or it could be pulled posteriorly, right? And the labrum basically is the boot, like I said, that goes around the shoulder joint, the actual humeral head. If that boot flows into the bicep, the long head of the bicep muscle. So if the long head of the bicep muscle is being stressed out, incidentally, it's a very high, we'll talk about this maybe in another podcast, but certain muscles are very much tied to your emotional state, and sometimes you may not even be doing bicep work, but that bicep will actually lock up because of current stress situation in your body, right? So, which then predisposes a person to a possible SLAP lesion. So, SLAP lesions are most underdiagnosed, and they're probably, there are a couple of tests. Like, it's obviously hard to show it over a podcast, but it's one of the tests I do when I look at people come in here for shoulder issues, is I'll assess to see if there's a labral issue. And a lot of times there is, even to a lesser degree, there is some. And unless you kind of address that, you can do a lot of the other work around the shoulder, but you're going to miss the biggest boat if you came to your doc. So, that's basically where I would say, that's one of the big areas that most people sort of overlook.
Yeah.
The other area, I would say, would be the neck. And what I mean by that is from a couple of perspectives. First of all, the vertebrae of the neck, C5, C6, which innervates pretty well most of your shoulder muscles and that surround the scapula. If that is compromised, it will impinge on a nerve, not let alone a disc in there. The disc also is highly innervated with nerve. The annulus of all discs is basically actually very highly innervated with nerve, and so if you compress the annulus, you may not even compress the nerve, but if you compress the annulus, basically you're causing a shutdown, a neurological shutdown. The other obvious one is actually the compression of the nerve, and also as the nerve exits from the neck, and it goes through the scalene muscles, and the scalene muscles are tight. It'll compress the nerve as well, and then also the other muscle that it tends to be a culprit to a nerve compression would be the pec minor. So the brachial plexus nerve travels through, and then it basically goes underneath or behind the pec minor. If you're doing a lot of chest work, for example, you compress the pec minor, which then will compress the nerve to the arm, and basically you'll have basically shoulder problem from there, because mechanically the arm will be off.
So you're referring to the shutdown of nerves, at least in the neck area. This is highly influenced, or basically, like you mentioned, being in this anterior type of position on the majority of the day, where you're always looking forward or you're looking downwards at something.
Definitely, if you're in an anterior position, you basically kind of preset your body into that position. So you've already sort of compromised yourself, or
Yeah, and I remember I came in for something, and he told me that my neck has that problem. You can actually do corrective exercises where you can kind of reactivate certain things, right?
The other thing here is a lot of people text nowadays.
Yeah.
With the exception of me.
He has a flip phone.
I guess I have a flip phone.
Yeah.
So, when you watch people text, you can see they crank their head way far forward, almost looking down, and that's almost into like 60 degrees of flexion.
Yeah.
that puts a strain on the posterior ligaments of the cervical spine. We stand if the ligaments are stretched out, they'll as well shut down any muscles in close proximity. In fact, anywhere in the body, really. So it will lock up the occiput, which is the base of the skull. The occiput locks up. You end up getting a what we call a posterior muscle shutdown. So any muscle in the posterior side of your body will basically become weak because the occiput gets jammed up. Because what you're trying to do, really, literally, when your head's in a very deep forward flexion, is you're pulling the back of your skull, the bone, away from your skull. Well, your skull doesn't like that. So what does it do? It jams it up even more to prevent you from pulling that bone away. So if you are going to text, I mean, I would tell people to text with their phone almost above their eye line, right? So you're holding the phone up, as opposed to having your head look down. So that'd be one of the lifestyle factors aside from we talked about the seating.
But what is there anything practical in terms of like almost anybody that could do in terms of like because especially a lot of university kids they'll find that they're in this position the majority of the day. Is there any type of kind of exercises that you could do just with yourself to kind of correct this? Like is there one that you could do like maybe go to a side of a corner of a wall and retract your shoulder blades and press into the wall and stuff?
You could do that. That's definitely, these are temporary fixes, but they're like, you have to understand, to work these areas really you need to look globally, and sometimes you need to look areas that are somewhat not necessarily related to that area. But having said that, let's just keep with the idea of is there something practical that we can do? Yeah, definitely going against the corner of a wall, almost like a bear rubbing his back on a tree, and you want to get on either side of the vertebrae and the mid back. That would be one thing. Stretching out your pecs or massaging out your pecs. I mean, you can do that just yourself, just massaging out there. Massaging out your biceps is a very good idea. And then obviously exercises. We can talk about that too, right? So,
like for example, like working your rhomboids.
Yeah, doing reverse flies, like incline reverse flies, where you basically on a 45-degree bench, lying face first on the long portion of the bench, doing reverse flies. There's some exercises that if you look up on the internet, it's the gentleman's name is Dr. Dale Buckberger. I believe he's the chiropractor for the Toronto Blue Jays. And anyways, he has an exercise called Blackburn 1, 2, and 3. So if you look it up on YouTube, you might be able to see it. They're Blackburn 1, 2, and 3. And these are very specific shoulder exercises to retrain the shoulder neurologically to seat in a more advantageous position in a relaxed state. So he has these pitchers do a lot of these exercises, and he's managed to reduce a lot of the rehab aspect for that team based on some of these exercises.
So that would kind of like incorporate in terms of the shoulder, kind of how it ties in with basically having a neck that's already too tight, being in a position where your shoulders are rolled forward the majority of the day, and then doing actual work where your body's not actually supposed to be working in this type of position.
You need to offset basically. In the end, what you need to do is to keep in mind that if you've been working in a flexion dominant position for most of the day, you can't go back in the gym and do the same thing and kind of exacerbate the same position. You need to work now on your extensors.
An extension, yeah.
So external rotations, with sideline dumbbell external rotations with a very light dumbbell. Again, making sure your shoulders seated properly. The other one a lot of people miss is articulating, getting the rib cage to become articulated. So tight intercostal muscles will cause the chest to collapse or cave in, which basically will prevent the shoulders from staying down and back, and cause them to rise anteriorly. Superiorly, and also around laterally. So basically, they end up coming around the rib cage.
Yeah.
Right, and the shoulder position tangentially is the best when it's closest to the spine, because if you look at the ribs, as the ribs exit from the spinous processes, right, they're actually flat, but then as they come around the body, they curve. You want your shoulder to be more on the flat section. So if you have a very tight rib cage, you won't be able to do that. So you need to, and then the obvious one, like you said, we talked about earlier, is the putting your back against a door frame. That
Yeah.
will definitely loosen up not only the processes, but probably even move some of the ribs. And
Yeah.
if you kind of cross your arms over across your chest, alternating them, maybe lift one arm up overhead, and doing that same position, you might be able to get these rib heads to articulate, or even the processes, right? So.
And in terms of like how a shoulder injury starts to present itself, it ties actually nicely in terms of how back pain even occurs as well, because you're in a seated position the majority of the day, right?
Yeah, back pain. Again, it's different for the back, but you're still sort of in what we call in a flexion state, because your pelvis will be rotated forward, right?
And let's be honest, the majority of people are not able to maintain a proper
Yeah.
kind of posture for the majority of the day.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you develop I work in a ratio of like 3 to 1, so the posterior side has to be almost three times stronger than the anterior side. So any anterior muscles.
So basically, to dumb that down, basically means you're saying the back of your body needs to be 3 times stronger than your front.
Yeah, the expression powerlifters and Olympic lifters use against bodybuilders is backs are to bodybuild. Backs are to powerlifters and Olympic lifters, like biceps are to bodybuilders. So, which kind of lends to an idea that there's a certain structure, architecture that the body likes.
Yeah.
And if you give it that architecture, it'll give you some flexion movement. You can build a big chest and big arms. But if you neglect the posterior side of your body, you can get the big arms and big chest, but you will get them at a price.
Yeah. I.e. imbalances and just
Imbalance is probably injury that we just talked about, right?
Yeah. And yeah, I do notice that a lot, especially if you talk to just regular gym goers. A lot of people only they train their back maybe once a week. They don't really put too much crazy effort into it, And here you are saying forget the chest and the shoulders and all that. Strengthen up your back, get your posterior side strong.
You can work the chest, but primarily the exercises have to be what we call stretch exercises, pullovers, dumbbell flies, but not like we're talking ballistic sort of movement. We're talking very light weights with flies.
Yeah.
And again, making sure that the whole tissue line from the chest all the way biceps all the way down the forearms is nice and loose. So that might require some soft tissue work either by a professional or maybe you can massage yourself doing some cupping. Cuppings are pretty good. You can buy cupping sets now. Popularized obviously more so with Michael Phelps, currently based on the 26 Olympic Games in Rio, but cupping has been going on for thousands of years with other cultures. So. You can do some cupping and kind of loosen up some of the tissue, especially around the shoulder, even biceps and forearms, and then from there, you proceed to the exercises. So you want exercises basically like a stretch, what we call stretch exercises, pullovers, like I said, chin ups to a certain degree, or anything that's going to cause you to open up that front tissue line.
Yeah. Okay. And now transitioning, back to the. To lower back problems, or just back problems in general. What have you basically seen in terms of why this is manifesting itself?
Lower back problems and knee problems, you might as well just put them in the same category, because if you get lower back problems, the knee is unstable. Because the nerve flow for the knee comes from the lower back area, by and large, in the hip. So there's one other area that sort of most people will get injured, but more so from the perspective of proprioception is the feet. You have to be able to get the foot not only strong, but to be proprioceptively responsive to where the body is at all times. So if you get the foot to do its work, the by and large, the knee and the shoulder will relax.
Yeah.
The knee and the hip will relax. At which point, then the shoulder will relax.
If I could come and interrupt you, because I came to see you because I've had a shoulder problem for a little while. And I remember after seeing you for a few sessions, I would notice I'm able to feel the ground a lot more. It's like my awareness of where my feet placement were increased by 20-30%. I'm I feel like I have a new set of feet under me. So, and I noticed too that it even helped in terms of just my ability to even walk in a straight line.
Yeah, definitely. Those are things that like I said, obviously it's not an area that people get injured aside from maybe ankle sprains, but by and large, if we look at, if you look at your lower back, the susceptibility of getting knee problems is greater. The susceptibility of getting ankle problems or ankle sprains, eversion sprains is greater, because obviously you've compromised the nerve flow to these areas. Nerve flow, and then also the sensory information that comes back up, travels up through the body.
So are you basically kind of referring to that, saying that, you know, majority of people, their feet are weak as it is? Is that
Again, just going back to our lifestyle issue, people are sitting at a desk all day. What do? They're motionless, right?
Yeah.
Their feet are really not getting any stimulation. So
yeah.
they need to, do sometimes subtle exercises for the foot to get them going. There's a lot of stuff to do with the foot just to get sometimes a problem alleviated in the shoulder. If you even if you have a shoulder problem, I have a lot of people come in. They come in with shoulder issues, and the main thing here is if you're sitting on a nail, get off the nail.
Yeah.
Like, you can't heal something unless you actually take the pressure off that, and that way it can heal. But
Yeah.
if you're constantly picking at it, it's never going to heal. So
Yeah.
working the foot, definitely, and maybe higher up to the hip, getting those areas strong will alter then the position of the shoulder and head and neck.
And what could people do in terms of, again, on a practical aspect to even just strengthen the foot as it is?
They can do from a basic perspective. They could do some you taking a bicycle tire maybe, and it's doing like eversion, inversion, strengthening, hooking the bike tire to something that's fixed. Doing some plantar or dorsiflexion, basically
Yeah.
moving your foot up and down
Yeah.
with some resistance. There is, from a more dynamic perspective, would be like skipping on your toes, like on the balls of your feet, so not usually using a lot of knee action. And then the other thing too is just stretch out the Achilles, making sure the Achilles and the gastrocnemius, or the calf area, and the soleus, as well as the tibialis posterior and some of the deeper compartment muscles, have adequate flexibility as well as circulation and lymphatic drainage to then facilitate overall a better ergonomics all the way up in terms of force buffering.
So it seems like we've now kind of, like, in terms of addressing and understanding what are some possible things that are causing these injuries to happen. So now let's kind of transition to, basically, let's say somebody has an injury. Let's say somebody has a shoulder problem, and they don't have access to a massage therapist or a sports therapist right away, but they still want to train. Is that still doable?
Yeah, again, like, there are certain what we call painful arcs of the or range of motions the shoulder will have. For example, if you have a glenohumeral issue, it's between 60 and 120 degrees of lateral flexion, right? So in that period, in that range of motion, will give you an indication if you have pain there. You probably can't do anything overhead, right? So the best thing to do if you have something like that is to work again in a horizontal neutral plane for your shoulder. So your neutral plane for your shoulder would be the arms would be bent or straight, and they were basically out at 45 degrees. You can't raise it past 45 degrees. If you go past 45 degrees, the shoulder joint is no longer in a neutral position based on a compromised position, right, to begin with. Under 45 degrees, most people can do that, no problem. But if they go past 45, that's when the shoulder becomes an issue. So looking at that point, working around it by strengthening the posterior muscles.
Yeah.
But again,
So these would be like your rhomboids and such.
yeah, again, but for example, doing face pulls, but not necessarily to the face, but really to the chest, because that's a neutral position for your shoulder.
Yeah.
Going past that angle is now going to activate more your traps, and you're going to start getting what we call improper recruitment of the muscles. Right. So keeping in a below a 45 degree plane, that's basically where the best, until you get that shoulder addressed, that's probably the safest thing. So if you want to do, let's say dumbbell rolls, for example, they're low. They're a low position, right? Your arms are close to your body. That's a good thing for your shoulder. As long as, again, you're not stretching out to begin with to reach for the dumbbell. making sure that your shoulder is, you know, tucked closest to your spine as much as you can. So that would mean, you know, sometimes even elevating the weight high enough so when you lift off the dumbbell, your shoulder's already in a good position. A lot of times people will do the dumbbell rows, the shoulder's already migrated around the rib cage.
Huh.
So at that point, you know, if it's a heavy load, you can't bring your shoulder back because the rhomboid, you just shut down the rhomboid. So
Yeah.
it's basically now it becomes a, you know, lat and posterior delt
Yeah.
work.
Huh.
Rhomboids are not even involved.
And now, what about for, like, let's say we have lower back pain?
For lower back pain, a good exercise would be reverse hyperextension for the most part. A lot of times it's the glutes that are not firing. Doing some soft tissue work into using a foam roller or lacrosse ball into the SI joint area on the SI ligaments on either side. Also releasing the glute medius with the lacrosse ball, as well as the posterior aspect of the greater trochanter. So that's where all the gluteal muscles, for the most part, attach onto that portion. And by releasing that, you basically get your glutes to fire. Pressure comes off your lower back for the most part. And also the other thing from the front perspective, stretch out your hip flexors, and definitely stretch out your quadriceps. And the best way to stretch out the quads is what we call a couch stretch. So it's basically what you're doing is just using the, you know, you bend your knee, put your knee on a nice comfy pad, and then your other leg is forward, but your other leg is bent behind you, and you're pressing back. You're using the couch to kind of allow to, as you lean back, you can use the couch to kind of push
So
your
for
leg.
support, kind of as well.
Yeah. To push your leg back to your butt, which basically will stretch out your quads.
And I remember you showed me the stretch, and you said you don't hold it for 30 seconds. Hold it for about a minute to 2 minutes.
Yeah, so all stretches have to be. Now, I have a good friend of mine who just finished his PhD on a concept called micro stretching. His name is Nikos Apostopoulos. Actually, he's a doctor now. Anyways, he finished his PhD on this, and from his research, he found that any stretch that is above a 3 out of 10 in terms of subjective intensity will elicit not only a stretch response, but will also possibly cause a mild inflammatory response. So the last thing you want to do in stretching is to create more, inflammation. As it is, training itself does that. So you want to basically keep the intensity between 2 and 3 out of 10. If it's around there, you're not going to get that stretch response, first of all, and you're going to because you're not getting that, you're not going to damage the muscle tissue, which is basically going to mean less of a inflammatory response.
So basically, you're saying that if you're doing the stretch and you feel like you're dying, you're doing it. You're not.
Yeah, if you feel like you're ripping the muscle off or close to it,
yeah.
probably want to back off there a bit, you know.
So just like slight tension, or like
Very slight tension. Like I said, it's very subjective, but you know, if we were to give you a scale, it'd be like 2 or 3
out of 10 in
out
terms
of
of
10.
pain.
So you want to hold that stretch for, according to his research, minimum of like say 2, possibly 3 minutes before you say, okay, you know what, I'm going to move to another area, because it might take that time for the tissue tension to sort of build up in other areas of that muscle, which normally, if you were to stretch it aggressively, you simply miss it. That's all. So this is a little bit more of a passive stretch, or static stretching, which I know recently in the past maybe 5-10 years has come under a lot of scrutiny because they say it shuts down the muscle, by 20-30%, and then prior to a dynamic activity like a sporting event. But this can be easily mitigated by then transitioning into some dynamic stretches, which can alleviate that problem. So I'm not a big proponent of dynamic stretching right off the get-go. I think you need to do this sort of micro stretching before you can get into more aggressive stretching.
You kind of have to prepare your body for that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And you kind of tied into in terms of like how the feet can also affect the knee, right, and how the knee is connected to the lower back.
Yeah, and like I said, that's through nerve flow by and large. Also, another way to look at it is through the fascial chains of the body. So if there are certain chains or lines of pull, if you want to call it, pretty well popularized, I think, by Thomas Myers in his book Anatomy Trains. But there have been other people who've sort of found other sort of muscle links or chains in the body. But nonetheless, some of these chains are compromised, which then, obviously from the foot, a lot of them make their origins from the foot. Very similar to acupuncture meridians. There's a few meridians that sort of start from the foot and then work their way up. So I'm not sure if they parallel, they kind of look like they parallel some of the acupuncture meridians, but it's still, I think, somewhat debatable. I believe they are. I think these lines of polar chains are actually, basically acupuncture, definitely are part of the acupuncture meridian system.
So so basically we've addressed in terms of addressing what are the shoulder, back, and knee problems. Now, could we, let's transition to basically how can we prevent these injuries from not even occurring, stopping them from from even happening.
Well,
because like you mentioned, ideally you want to prevent injuries rather than mitigate them, right?
so when you're developing the body, there is a distinct architecture, and if you develop it a certain way, it will give you results you want with minimal pain. So let's just look at the arm, for example. In order to get, say, bigger arms, you need to have a very strong wrist and grip, as well as finger strength. You also need to develop a rotational wrist strength, so what we call pronation, supination. You also need to develop what we call radial or ulnar deviation strength. And then finally, you need to develop a good set of posterior deltoids, and then the lateral deltoids, and then finally, the anterior deltoid. The anterior is the last one you want to work, because if that one's worked predominantly through, let's say, bench pressing, for example, shoulder pressing, like dumbbell bench pressing, that will cause that shoulder to migrate anteriorly, which basically will take the proverbial golf ball off the golf tee, because that's what the shoulder joint is. It's basically a very shallow joint with a golf ball, basically the humeral head. You want to make sure that's seated properly.
Yeah.
And so by developing the posterior delt and then getting that, secondly developing the lateral delt, the last thing you want to do then is develop your anterior delt, and then at that point now you can start working your arms, right?
And that's when you can start doing your curls and your triceps and all
That's
that
right.
type of stuff.
You could do that right away, but I'm just trying to save you some hassle before you even get to the point where you're getting injured, which means look at it this way: I would rather sort of be training at a lesser load than to have to miss training for about 2 weeks because of an injury, right? So, and once you get that injury, you have scar tissue. If that's not broken up properly, you just kind of set yourself for another injury in one sense. So, take the time to kind of go back and do all these some sort of preliminary things, develop them in proportion, and you save yourself some hassle later on when you're trying to develop the gun show.
And what about in terms of the lower back?
The lower back, again, lower back reverse hypers are good exercises. Also, stretching out the deeper rotators of the hip, so if you go online, you can see there's it's called pigeon pose. It's a fairly aggressive stretch, but you can mitigate it somehow by using yoga blocks and to kind of prop or a yoga roll to kind of prop your body up, so you're not getting into too much of a deep stretch, and then as your body gets accustomed to it, you can then get into a much deeper stretch by taking away the blocks. The other thing the stretches will tell you is where you need to work. So the yoga blocks, and using the yoga blocks and whatnot. If you're doing that kind of stretch, it might show you, okay, you know what, that it might be like your deep rotators, your hip there tights. Well, at that point you can use a lacrosse ball or a foam roller and kind of massage out that point, go back into the stretch. You should be able to proceed a little bit deeper, right? Another exercise for the lower back would be definitely strengthening up the midsection. And for everyone out there, please don't think, oh, I'm going to do some planks. That is not an exercise to be done. I know it does work. The EMG studies have said, it does work the transverse, but it's not how you work your abs. Your abs are a dynamic muscle. They're not a static muscle. And so you need to work it two ways. And plus, if you're in a plank position, all your guts are basically, you know, your body allows your guts to kind of drop down or plop down into your pelvic in the, you know, the what we call the visceral basin, right? And at which point now you're not going to really adequately, you know, contract those muscles, right? I know it's been popularized over the few years, but I don't think I've ever done that exercise with any of my clients, and most of my clients don't have a lot of back problems. The ones that do have back problems are actually ones doing the planks. So, you know, but anyways, that another exercise for the back would be, we mentioned the reverse hyper, would be barbell hip bridges. So that's another good exercise to do.
And would you want to do this like just laying down on the floor? Or would you want to be elevated using a bench? Or?
Well, the gentleman that kind of popularized it is a gentleman by the name of I think he has his PhD now, so I'm going to call him Doctor Brent Contreras, and I believe he's called the Glute Guy. So if you just type it on Google, and the Glute Guy, you know, I have no affiliation to him. But anyway, he sort of popularized exercise. He's kind of done a lot of EMG studies on the glutes and whatnot. So he's really kind of he's really an ass, if you want to call it that way. But anyways, no, that was a little joke. But anyways, he recommends the hip bridges done over a bench. He actually even has a device that he's invented using bands. So if you don't have you know, plates in the barbell, you can actually just use bands. I don't do that particularly. I find you know, if you just do them on the ground, barbell hip bridges, they're quite adequate. They'll still give you some benefit. You've got to sort of set your position. Like, you have to create tension patterns by which you can use that exercise. So that exercise, you know, if you don't do it correctly, actually will hurt your back. And all these exercises I mentioned, every one of them so far, are all done with very light load. They're not done with aggressively heavy loads. Like, you don't want to be doing, like, you know, 1 RMs on some of these exercises.
Yeah.
It's just not a good idea, because you can do it, but the mechanics of that muscle and the leverage that you get from it are not really designed for, like, you know, 1 RM. You know, it's very risky. So another good exercise, but sort of like a later exercise, would be a good morning, or a good morning squat, or even, I know a lot of Olympic lifters use the back extension, barbell back extension or plate back extension, where they lie across a glute ham gastroc machine and do back extensions. So these are areas that you want to look at. The other thing too is to release the thoracolumbar fascia. That's a lot of times the back is tight. Last thing you want to do, even though if you strengthen the areas around it, you still have that tension pattern in the back. So you need to release that area through some soft tissue work, and that is not going to really come through with a foam roller or a crossball. You actually need somebody to go in there. It's a very special technique to sort of loosen up that fascia.
Fair enough. Is there any other areas that you want to touch up on?
I think one of the things you should look at, with respect to the shoulder, is a certain range of motion the humerus and the scapula go through. So it's like a 3-to-1 ratio. So for every 3 degrees the humerus moves, you have 1 degree of movement for the scapula. And a lot of times you'll find people, it's the opposite. The scapula is moving way too, almost like a 1-to-1 ratio, and that kind of sets them up again. It just tells you the rhomboids are very weak. The serratus could be very tight. It could be, and subscapularis could be tight. They could be adhered together. Well, by the way, that's a very big area. Like, it's a money area, if you want to call it. It's in the armpit, maybe about 2-3 inches below the armpit, where the shoulder blade. You can kind of feel the shoulder blade attach onto closest to the rib cage, and a lot of time that area there will be really tight for a lot of people. So that's another area you can probably do work on yourself, or you can get a trained therapist to sort of get into that area, because it's basically forcing the shoulder to be in an anterior position. Right. Another couple quick little things. So there's 4 types of for the what we call acromions. Acromion is the joint in the shoulder. There's what we call a flat type, which is, if you're blessed with that, you're probably going to be a good bencher. If you got a curved type, you're not bad. You make do. The worst is the hooked type acromion, at which point you're more susceptible to shoulder problems. So, not everybody can be benching. Not everybody can be shoulder pressing, just because of the anatomical shape of the acromion. And I believe there's only 3. I'm not sure if there's 4. I can't remember exactly. And with respect to the hip, there's, I think, 4 types or 5 types of what we call femoral anteversion. And so basically, it's where the femur makes its attachment into the socket of the acetabulum, and that angle, the femoral neck angle, can determine whether or not you're going to be a good lifter, a good runner, or basically you should think about maybe taking up bingo. So, but that's somewhat hard to assess unless you were getting an X-ray.
Yeah, and actually get a look at it. Yeah.
But because obviously that joint's very deep, right? You really can't get an idea 100%, but you can. I'm sure there's probably some tests out there that probably will do that. Right.
Fair enough.
One other thing too is a very simple test for your shoulder, whether or not you're ready for shoulder exercises. If you take your hand and you bring it behind your back, almost like you're trying to scratch your back, but from the bottom. So you're doing an internal rotation and upward, internal rotation, and basically try to put your back of your hand on your back. That'd be one. The other one is what we call a back scratch. So you're reaching back over your head to touch your back, and both arms, position of both arms, where the fingers touch the back at the most prominent or superior portion, they should be equal. You should have symmetry in there. The other thing too is that you should be able to even get your back. I've known a lot of people who are doing the shoulder exercises, but they can't even take their hand almost like what we call if you're akin to like if an officer was going to put handcuffs on you, he'd bring your hands in the back like that. They get stuck in that position. They can't even bring their hand up their back. So these people are predisposed to a shoulder problem. Another one's a little harder, but it's basically horizontal flexion and internal rotation. They should have about 45 degrees in that movement. If they do, basically that means the labrum is intact, and it's there's no tightness in the boot of the shoulder, which is very important. So those are the areas I would sort of check, for respect to those joints.
Okay. Any last touch-ups or?
Yeah, just a few things in terms of, so what happens if you get a shoulder problem? The best thing to do, good product online, I've seen is a product called Pro Ice. A lot of the pitchers in the MLB use this product, and it's just like a strapped device that has it's ice, but the ice cube, the trays are actually is plastic, and they're made out of little trays, and they basically inject fluid in these little compartments, and the fluid it's water, but it's also some other compounds, which is proprietary to the company. But it allows you to freeze that bag, that tray, and then that tray can be slipped into a sleeve, and the sleeve basically is wrapped around with some Velcro and stuff and around your arm. And basically, a lot of pitchers after the game will, instead of putting bags of ice on there, they'll strap on, a Pro Ice device.
And what's that called? Device called?
It's called Pro Ice.
Pro Ice, okay.
I believe the site's called proice.com, and you can put it in a cooler. For example, you go to a gym and you have a little cooler with you, or even if you leave it in your bag, providing the gym is air conditioned, that will actually stay ice for at least 3 or 4 hours. Yeah, it's not like regular ice. It's actually water mixed with some other solvents and stuff to actually able to maintain that cold temperature. Right. Just one last thing, basically, you know, you want to be able to strengthen up, like to do the shoulders, you want to make sure that you're strengthening up your back, your neck extensors, neck rotators. Make sure the ribs are released. Strengthen up posterior delt, strengthen up the wrist, the grip. At which point, then I think you'd have a more, better workout.
Better condition in terms of being
Yeah.
able to basically
Yeah.
work in that environment.
Yeah, for sure.
Uh,
Right, and just one last little thing here. The history of the bench press, since 1976, I believe is the last time they actually had an overhead lifting in the Olympic competition. So it was actually 3 lifts. It was clean and jerk, snatch, and overhead press. They eliminated that lift because they just felt like people were cheating a lot, just mechanically. But nonetheless, so prior to '76. If you went to most gyms, you wouldn't see that many bench presses. You actually see a lot of military presses, like squat stands. After '76, because of the elimination of that lift in terms of competition, it wasn't popularized. Something had to kind of replace it. And so what you found now was in colleges, there's an increase in the actual benches. It's then basically an increase now in, shoulder injuries. So a little aside here, it's, before you start doing benching, you want to make sure you're really good at overhead pressing, right? And a lot of times, if you, the stronger your overhead press is, the better your bench is going to be. So, I think that's about it.
Okay. All right. Awesome. We got number 5 on the books then.
How much was it?